연사님 소개하기 전에 두 가지를 먼저 말씀드리겠습니다. 첫 번째는 아쉽게도 이제 그 영어 트랜슬레이션이 이번에는 제공되지 않습니다. 작년에는 제공되어서 좋았는데요. 그 대신 어제 연사분도 그렇고 오늘 연사분도 그렇고 좀 천천히 이렇게 또박또박 말씀을 해달라고 부탁을 드렸습니다. 그래서 특히나 이제 바우디시 교수님은 이렇게 말씀하시다고 빨라지신대요. 그래서 빨라지면 제가 시간을 하겠다고 말씀드렸고요. 그리고 또 하나는 지금 오늘 키노트도 그렇고 내일 키노트 다 촬영을 녹화를 하고 있습니다. 해서 나중에 한글 자막을 넣어서 학회 홈페이지에 올릴 계획입니다. 그래서 혹시 이제 이해가 어려우시더라도 이제 다음에 다시 또 들으실 수 있을 기회가 있습니다. 그리고 또 한 가지 말씀드릴 거는 오늘 키노트와 어제 키노트 둘 다 ACM 시그카이 지원을 받았습니다. 이건 영어로 말씀드릴 것 같은데요. This keynote talk as well as the keynote yesterday is supported by ACM 시그카이. Let's thank 시그카이. Okay, then let me introduce today's speaker briefly in Korean. 바우디시 교수님은 독일 다음스테트 유니버시티 오브 테크놀로지에서 컴퓨터 사이언스 PhD 학위를 받으시고 마이크로소프트 리서치, 어댑티브 시스템즈 인터랙티브 리서치 그래서 리서치 사이언티스트로 계시다가 지금 현재 포트담 대학 하송 플래티너 인스티튜트에서 컴퓨터 사이언스 교수로 재직 중입니다. 단연간 내추럴 유저 인터페이스, 모바일 디바이스, 터치 인풋 분야 연구를 해오셨고요. 그리고 현재 중점 연구 분야는 인터랙티브 패브리케이션입니다. 오늘 톡의 주제가 되겠는데요. 2013년에 카이 아카데미 멤버가 되셨고 2014년에 ACM Distinguished Scientist가 되셨습니다. The title of the talk today is 5 Challenges for Personal Fabrication. Okay, please join me welcoming Professor Baudish.
감사합니다. I will not try to give this in Korean, but I will try to speak slowly. And whenever I speak too fast, you all raise your hands. Is that okay? Can you do that? Can you try this out real quick? All raise your hands. Okay, I'm speaking too fast already. All right, I'll try. So, I know this is a diverse audience. How many of you are students actually? These? I see. And how many of you actually have a job, you're here for a job because you're actually a usability person or you make money with HCI? Okay, not that many. Mostly you spend money with HCI. Good, all right. So, thanks so much for having me. So, I've been a professor at Hasselblad Institute for the past 8 years. As Georg was saying, my background is in interactive devices. I spent many years of Microsoft research working on creating all types of different interactive hardware, and including touch screens, interactive floors, a variety of different things. And then something like 3 years ago, I got really excited about this, what I think of as a reasonable new topic, personal fabrication. And I'm really excited about it because I think it's everything I always wanted in a research project and more. So maybe today I can get you a little bit excited about this topic as well. And I will try to make it actionable by telling you what I think are interesting things to, open questions, and maybe, two of you want to, grab me afterwards and maybe have some answers, maybe want to help me work on these things. All right, so here's a little teaser. This is one of the things I'll show you. We've been working on different software and hardware techniques that allow us to use 3D printers and laser cutters in more efficient ways. All right, there we go. And I need to push this button here. All right, so I'm actually kind of curious. How many of you ever used the 3D printer? Okay, wow, great. That's like a third of it. Fantastic. So, for those of you who haven't done this, it's very, very simple. Today, there's a good amount of machinery out there that allows you to make things under computer control. A milling machine, a little more messy, used less often, is a subtractive tool, removes material. 3D printers are additive material, so you put, essentially it starts with zero and builds up the object, and laser cutters, kind of almost my favorite, also remove material, cut material up in different parts. If you think about how they implement it, there's a lot of different ways how to implement these things, but essentially you have some sort of a robotic thing, like an XYZ table, some sort of construction that allows you to place a tool in 3D space. Could look like this. And then at the end of this, you mount either a drill, and that's called a milling machine, or you put a glue gun there, kind of the same heat gun that the heat glue gun that you maybe used in kindergarten, or a cutting laser, and then you've made a new fabrication tool. There's lots of other ways of implementing this, obviously, as well. So I think this is really going to change the world, and let me try to tell you why I think that it is. So traditionally, when you're having a mechanical problem, you have a mechanical solution for it. So let me show you an example of how this works. So for example, here's an example. I want to make a copy of something, and what I do is I'm getting myself an analog copy machine. So let me show you an analog copy machine. I don't know if you ever did this, if you lost your keys. I certainly have. So this is the actual original key that you have, and this is a blank key, right? So it looks the same, but it does not have the pattern in the, I guess it's called beard. And so you both put them to the machine. Let me give you some sound of this thing. Sounds like this. And what happens now is essentially this side here is sort of a scanner. You push this into the key, and at the same time you're cutting on the other side, and you're getting a direct copy from one to the other, right? And I'm sure if you're anything like me, you've lost a bunch of keys in your life. So this is a mechanical tool that creates a mechanical solution for a mechanical problem, but it's an analog solution, and it requires a highly specialized machine. You cannot really, all this thing does is copy keys, actually just a certain subset of keys. Now, how this is changing today is we're moving to a digital model. So instead of directly making a copy, you actually first 3D scan the object, then you do everything you need to do in digital, and then you reprint it, and you get this out. And you might have seen this type of process before. The copy machine that you have at your office, copy machines used to be analog. I used to work for Xerox, so Xerox had this process of copying things. And today it looks exactly the same as your old copy machine, but it actually is a scanner-printer combination. It just looks exactly the same as before. Now what's interesting about this process is, so in the first place the same thing comes out. I can still put a cup in, I get 2 cups out. 3D printer, 3D scanner, all fine. The difference between the two methods is the fact that now, in the moment of creating this, I've created a digital cup for a moment. And this digital cup is really what this talk is about. Without this digital cup, I would have exactly what I had before. But this digital cup is very interesting because now we're in computer science land. Okay, so this digital cup goes a long way. We're going to talk about sharing on BitTorrent and all the things that can happen to the cup. So it enables completely new workflows. Here's one example. One of the early adopters is the car industry, and if you're a proud owner of a 1974 Volkswagen Golf, and if you happen to bump into that bumper, again, if you're anything like me, and you damage the car periodically, you might want to get a replacement part of this thing. And for Volkswagen, that's actually a difficult challenge. They need to they need to have that part. And so when you order the part, you're going to get it shipped from a very remote location, maybe in Wolfsburg, Germany. Someone's going to package this up and send it to you, and you're going to pay, I don't know, $150 or something like this for a piece of plastic. And you're like, what? Why is this so expensive? Well, the reason is that Volkswagen is not interested. They really need to, it's a lot of effort they have just to maintain every single part of every single model they ever made. And this is actually one of the things where fabrication can come in. So rather than actually holding on to these legacy parts and then producing them, small quantities when you need them, you can actually just store the digital model and produce them on demand when you need them. And then in slightly more distant future, this model actually could go to a fab lab close to you. So rather than getting it from Wolfsburg, you could actually get it from like the local fab lab in Seoul or wherever you are. And in some even more distant future, this model could actually come to you. You have a 3D printer at home, the model is sent to you, and while you're still like under the car fixing things, the model actually 3D prints and you're inserting it into your car, and you can actually finish things in the same day for much less money. So it's one of the potentials, and the solution I just described to you is a classic database solution, right? This is kind of what computer science does, very different from how mechanical engineering does things. So is it going to be big? I think yes, and here's why. So let me show you the pattern again. Here's this pattern. There's like some sort of you've got some sort of a scanner here, you've got a printer. You stick in an object and, okay, so you convert it to digital and then you convert it back to analog. Let me show you this pattern in the past. So you may remember this one if you're, well, not the students, but the rest maybe. You know, desktop publishing became really big in the 80s. Before this, people would kind of make layouts by actually having paper clips, and it was, when you're submitting something to a conference, they want a camera ready. That's because there used to be camera when they made that ready version of the talk. Today, obviously, there's no camera ready, there's no camera involved anymore, but it used to be. And so, at the time when scanners and printers were available, you could actually solve everything you need to solve in computer science land. That's exactly what happens when you're submitting a publication to this venue here. You know, I'm sure there was no camera was involved in that. Here's a different version of that pattern. Music production, right? Was analog. You know, you had like an LP, maybe you still have some LPs, but it became all digital, and in between you have digital distribution. That's kind of why we have Apple the way we have it today. Apple became a media company because of this model here. A lot of things changed. One of my favorites in the 1970s, a guy called Schaub at Xerox, he stole away time at night, and he did this here. He used a tape recorder and he ripped videotape onto a Xerox Alto, and then they painted around in the picture, and then they wrote it back to the tape. People thought it was a tremendous waste of time at the time. People threatened him to fire him for wasting company properties for working on these things. But he actually got an Emmy Award years later because he invented video editing. Okay, so if you think of, like, you know, back in the day when MTV actually had video clips, you know, it created a whole new art form. And if you go further back, you know, there are lots of instances of this pattern. You could even go back to as interactive computer terminals. Before this, there was no interacting with computers, and there was a way where you could type something in, and there was a printer on the other side, and somehow you closed the loop, and this made computer system interactive. So the pattern that we see in fabrication today, the presence of a printer and a matching scanner, is a pattern we've seen a lot in computer science, interactive computer science, and every single time we saw this pattern, big things happened. And I think big things will happen again this time. So the world changed. And essentially what happened, this other field, you know, that was scanned and printed, that kind of was sucked into computer science. This might have been a separate field before, like desktop publishing. If you ask someone in the 70s, you know, and they were like a layouter, they would not say, I have a computer job, right? This was a completely separate profession. But then since the 80s, you know, being a layouter certainly became a computer job. You know, new jobs were created, lots of old jobs were killed, you know, huge industrial change happened as a result. So, and what's interesting about 3D printing is it's certainly going to affect things. It's not just one field, it's all the fields that have to do with physical matter are affected this way. So you can think of, you know, this could be like structural engineering, mechanical engineering, everyone who deals with physical matter today will be affected by this. It's actually happening. Let me start with this one here. I kind of like this one. So my student Stephanie kind of dug up how many papers are submitted in HCI graphics conference on the topic. So, okay, so this was until last year, and you can see how the number, like there was nothing before 2011, and then the number of publications has really steadily ramped up. I was in the WIS program committee last time, and I think out of the 40 people on the committee, there were 6 people who said that their primary interest is fabrication. So it's really like happening in a very big way. There's exponential growth in the maker scene. So I like this web page here. They have 200 different 3D printer designs. You can go there. Most of them are royalty free. You just kind of look at the models. You can download them and you can make your own. You can make yourself a 3D printer. A lot of things happening there. The exponential growth in sales in 3D printing. And I think what's really interesting is that the industry is trying to address other people. So the first 3D printer actually I own is this one here, which costs $50,000. I guess that makes it something like 60 million won. Then the next one I bought was a MakerBot for 3,000. Right, so look at the huge price drop. And this was intended makers, so not professional users anymore, but people who just enjoy doing these things, hobbyists. And then now there's a printer called PrinterBot, This is the cheapest thing. I also don't necessarily recommend it, but it's interesting to see that this can still be done with less money than the previous ones. And so this raised the question if this could go out to consumers. And I just met with people at Packard like 4 weeks ago, and they're going to put out a new model this year that's the first time that's actually addressing consumers, very deliberately addressing consumers in that space. So I think this is a great opportunity, and I think the great opportunity is to have millions of people make things. So I think that's exciting because it depends on what people make. And I'm an engineer, and I would like them to engineer. I would like them to solve mechanical problems. I would like them to come together, make local adaptations of what they need for where they live, and I would like them to collaborate together in solving bigger problems. And I think there's good evidence in computer science where at the moment lots of, millions of people can work on the same problem together, that bigger problems are being solved. So this is something I'm really excited about. So I think the grand challenge is to let everyone solve mechanical problems, right? The same way that desktop publishing systems let everyone publish and movie editing. I can edit movies on my cell phone today, and I think we're going to see similar things for mechanical problems in the future. So now to get there, I think there's a bunch of different sub-challenges we have to solve. There's still a lot of work in materials. I'm not going to talk about this today. I'm going to show a lot of work on interactivity. I think initially these machines were terrible batch processing systems. They still are. You work on them, you print them out, it doesn't work, you go back. I think one of the key elements is adding domain knowledge when people want to make smart things. I don't know about you, but I know very little about desktop publishing, but I like the fact that I have a desktop publishing software that shows me how to do things. So that's very powerful. That's the key idea of a software system, that it can, what you're lacking in skill, what I'm lacking in skill, the software system can actually add to us. And then we're going to look a little bit more into the future and we're going to talk about sustainability. The moment you make bits, bits go away reasonably easily, well, minus NSA and so on. But physical matter is actually produced a lot of waste, so we have to think about these things. And the last thing I want to look at is intellectual property. People suing each other over fabrication things. All right, let me jump right in and let's start with interactivity. So this is the only part of German I have in this thing. Let's see, after I said down, maybe you can show this one for me. So this is from a German distributor, AlphaCam, and it says, alles schläft, einer schafft. Everyone's asleep, only one is working. So they think of this as a commercial for the 3D printer. They want to say, look, our 3D printers are so reliable. When you already have gone home, these things keep working. But what it says to me is, our printers are so slow that when you can already go home, our machines still have to work because they're so damn slow. So I'm not sure that's really a commercial. I'm not sure they're helping themselves. So this is kind of how long 3D printing takes today. If you want to make, a small print, it can be like an hour. There's not much you get in an hour. It's kind of like this size. We could make something bigger. That would take something like, a day. And then people have printed houses and airplane wings and so on. This can take as ever long as you want. So no one seems to mind the waiting, right? It's really slow. Everyone's okay with that. And I think we've seen also that before. If you think about computing, back in the day, computing used to be very slow. So I don't remember this. Like if you're substantially older than I am, you may remember times when you went to a terminal and you had a stack of punch cards. You had your program, you compiled your program, you went to the machine, you dumped it into the machine and tucked the cards in, and then next day you get a report back that says error in line 20. And then you would repeat the process and you would edit your program and repeat the whole thing. That's called batch processing, and this was done in computing with punch cards in the 50s or something like that. So I don't know if you recognize. Okay, so this on the left is not Ivan Sutherland's Summon Operating System though, but here's Sutherland's system, and on the right is obviously Doug Engelbart. So these are key pioneers of interactive computing, and ever since we listened to these people, we realized that computing can be different, right? We don't have to sit there and just send something to the computer and get it back the next day. We can actually interact with computers. And so in our group, we've kind of tried to look at these things for a while now. And we do something we call low-fab. And the thing I showed you earlier is actually kind of an example of what we call low-fab. So we had some idea of how to make low-quality prints. What I just showed you is a low-quality print because it's this mesh there. It's not as good as the actual object. And we came up with a bunch of ideas how we can make versions of 3D print that are not as good as the original really wants to be. And we're like, what are we going to do with this thing? So we could be 10 times faster, but what is it going to be useful for? Many of these objects, they just don't have the same qualities. But then, so we could conceptually get printing to a minute range, but the objects are not that satisfying. So, but then we realized that these things are typically don't, this is not all that happens. People typically have series of designs. So I know many of you are designers, so typically you don't just solve the problem once, you kind of make a solution, then it may not work that well, you iterate a bunch of times, and every single time, you might actually print something out. And so this was a workflow we felt we could actually help with, and this is what we call low fab, or low fidelity fabrication. The traditional workflow was that, you would start with a 3D model and you get everything is high fidelity, and then you're printing again, it's again high fidelity. But we felt like we could actually do better if the in-between steps, they could be low fidelity. So the idea would be that rather than printing, 16 hours every single time, you would make one 3D print that was really nice at the end, and in between you make these low quality versions of it. So let me show you one that we showed at Pi a year and a half ago, called Fabricator. And as you can see, are Legos big in this country? Who played with Legos as a kid? Lego bricks? No? Some of you, okay, good. Okay, this was certainly a childhood favorite of mine, playing with Lego bricks. So, let me show you how this works. So I load my 3D model into the Fabricator software, and I say Legofy, and it makes Legos out of them. And in this case, I just want to check the optical path. This is a VR headset, and I just want to make sure that the lenses are in the right location. So I go back in and I tell these areas around the lenses that they should be 3D printed, and everything else I'm okay with having in Legos. So I'm exporting this as an STL file. That's the standard format, the terrible standard format for 3D printing. And one of the things printing, I can sit down and actually assemble the rest of this thing. And when it's done, I've got my 3D printed parts, they fit in perfectly into the Lego setup, I pop them in, and I can start trying this out. It looks a little funny. We're all going to wear these things in the future, believe me. Alright, and I can continue to operate. So Lego is highly modular, right? And as a designer, I would like a modular design, so now I can adjust like the headpiece and so on, and it just can go through my process a bunch of times. And when I'm all done, then I'm going to 3D print the whole thing, and I've saved a lot of time. I should update this. So we actually created a webpage called brickify.it, and if you're interested in this, you can check this out. You can actually drop your own STL files in there, it converts them for you, and you can try out this process. And in the software, you can go in and you can tell the system how much, what parts of the model you would like to be Legos, and which parts you're happy with being 3D printed. So Legos were great because they were very modular. We also talked to like the Stanford Teachers Association about using those in class, or in high school. Kids are very familiar with Legos and it seemed like a really good approach. But there were other applications where Legos didn't seem to fit that well, and one of them was ergonomic testing. So if you're working for a company that actually makes that grip, so I'm using this old Logitech presenter here, the size of the shape of the grip is really important for me. So these things are very carefully designed, for example, at companies like OXO. So we wanted to have a fabrication, a low-fab version that actually captured more of the essence of the shape. And this is actually what I showed you earlier called wireframe. So again, it's the same method as before. You can actually go in and say which parts of this you would like to have high fidelity fabricated. So in this case, this is kind of a piece of a bunny here. I can say I want this to be high fidelity and everything else is low fidelity. And again, I'm getting the speed of something like a factor of 10. Not quite that fast yet. All right. And then the last version we actually showed at the last Kai, called Platener, because we're replacing the contents with little plates. So this is actually a 3D model that was designed for fabrication with a 3D printer. And what we did is we kind of said, like, maybe we can convert this to a laser cutter, which fabricates way, way faster. So here's the same model that we converted in a bunch of different ways. The actual model itself takes 16 hours to print, and then all these other versions are different types of low fidelity versions of that headset. And let me show you that. Okay, so the same process as before. You can kind of mark up what parts you want high fidelity, and the rest is converted to these convoluted plates. So that was the idea of low fidelity fabrication. And what we got out was, we got a technique for 3D printing that got us up kind of to the minute range. So you could work with 3D print and you would quickly fabricate like a little test run, see if it fits your hand really well, ergonomics, whatever you wanted to test, and then you could iterate quickly. And so the idea would be that, rather than a single process taking a week where you like print on Monday, print on Tuesday, print on Wednesday, print on Thursday, you would print 5, 6, 7 times in a day, and then overnight you would print for the customer and you'd be done. So we wanted to push this further, and the next thing we were wondering, can we get 3D, can we get up the interactive rate to like a second range? What would that be like? And so if you believe in my analogy earlier, we wanted to transition from batch systems to the command line. We're still like in the 60s, right? But like rather than like sending out a batch of punch cards, we wanted to interact with the system every multiple times a minute. So here's a system we built called Constructible. That's my student Stephanie, who is actually involved in a lot of the wonderful work. And we're thinking of the laser cutter as kind of a touch screen in a way. So I don't know if you can see this here. There's a laser. When she points, she actually gets like a red dot here. There's a camera system above that tracks what she's doing. The system beautifies things and then refabricates with the actually built-in laser. She has 20 different tools. One of them only extrudes, one of them only makes rectilinear contents, and you'll see a couple of things. This one is one that allows you to trace objects. This one does finger joints, so if you want to make a box, you probably want to have finger joints in there. So we had a lot of specialized tools. And this combination, for example, I showed you here, allows people to make the simple gearbox. And notice the fact there was no computer involved here, you're interacting directly with the workpiece later. We show you one more thing. This is a little booklet, and we actually took this on the road. We actually took this to Kai, and we also took it to the Tangible and Embedded conference, a laser cutter there, and people could try these things out there. So again, like here, the pull line tool gives me a chance just to make a little frame. I can round the corners, and you can see the laser. I don't know if you can see this. It just chops off the corners here. You just cross these edges, and then the laser cutter goes in and rounds the corners. And the last tool is a bend tool. It's actually my favorite. Right, there you go. Here's the little booklet. The bend actually allows you to bend the thing. You put like some receipts in. Here's a rubber band. And that's very similar to how we interact with touchscreens today, right? There's no one is sitting down in a terminal anymore. We work directly in a very direct way with the objects. Here's how we actually took this on the road. This is at the Tangible and Embedded conference here. We could make these things. So Constructible was limited though because it only did two-dimensional objects. That's the main limitation of laser cutters. I love laser cutters, they're very fast. And now actually curious again, has anyone ever used a laser cutter? Wow, okay. It's like more popular than 3D printers. Okay, you got on the right track, laser cutters walk. Okay, so we wanted to extend the system to also do 3D objects. And the question was, how can we do 3D objects? And here's our approach to it that we call laser origami. And as you notice, there's actually something, let me actually run this back. There's actually something in the laser cutter. So the object, do you see these little pins here? So the object is actually set down on a bunch of these prongs that kind of push it up. And so as before, we can cut using the laser cutter. But now what we're doing is we're moving the laser cutter down, and now the laser is defocused. So now here, you can see this getting transparent here. The laser is moving back and forth, but it can't cut anymore. It only heats it up because the laser is now blurred. And so what happens is, under the weight in its own weight, it starts to bend. And in this one process, we can both cut and fold. And so I don't know if you recognize this. This is a camera holder for a mobile phone. And so normally, if you would make this would take a couple of hours using a 3D printer. And with laser origami, this was a fast thing to do. We integrated this into standard packages like Visio, so you can just drag some of these bent components into your workpiece, and then fabricate things really quickly as well. Let me show you one more example, just because I think it's fun to watch. So this is a little plant holder, and you can see the little arms in here. These are the arms that we're going to bend in a second here. So we're defocusing the laser. Now the laser goes around and heats up all these different things. Took us a long time to optimize that to actually work, reliably. So now we're done with this piece, we're moving back up, we're cutting it out. I really like this art because now it's actually dropping down. I think it's very satisfying to have the workpiece kind of fall out of the machine. And here Stephanie's assembling this. And just to show that we're still computer scientists, she used a computer cable to mount this here. So here's a more recent thing actually. We took another step on the same topic, something called laser stacker. And this actually, we presented this at the WIS conference like 3 months ago. And the interesting thing here is, let me show this again. So this is my student Ludwig coming in, and he does not have a single sheet of acrylic, he has 3 sheets of acrylic. In his hand there's 3 sheets of acrylic, and he puts them in all at the same time. Okay, here are the 3 sheets. Does a good job of showing this to the camera. And he's going to make a pair of scissors now, and the pair of scissors will be welded in the laser cutter. So when they come out, they're actually already assembled. And so it's a really interesting design if you think about it. These are the 2 handles of the scissors. I can actually just pause here and tell you how this works. So the system does 3 types of interaction. The first thing it does is you can cut through things, obviously. The second thing you can do is you can cut partially into a layer. And when you cut partially into a layer, what happens? Some of the material evaporates locally and starts to condensate around it and glues the material together with other things. That's how the welding works. So that by itself was not all that useful. We also found a way how to release welds. So we found if we cut a little bit next to that, and obviously lots of details in the paper, we could remove some of these, we could heal some of the things we had done. And I think this was what I really enjoyed the most was if you have in the material you have a cut and you make another cut not all the way through right next to it, the material actually bends over a little bit into the cut, and we could weld it back together with the material. So we found a way actually of healing these cuts. And so by cutting, welding, and healing cuts and healing welds, we were able to make these things. Okay, so here's the software package we wrote. I think I stopped the video too early. You didn't see how the scissors actually work. So these actually cut paper. So we wrote, again, with the SketchUp extension in this case, we can go in and model these scissors. You didn't see the punchline. You didn't see how the scissors actually cut. So, and then you can drag in different types of components where we help you in making these things more efficient. I'll stop here. All right. So we were at a level now where we could interact with things pretty quickly because we interact with them on a per element basis and also known as interactive fabrication. So, okay, these were the key things, but we wanted to push it one further, and we were wondering what could it be like to interact in real time. And so, could we interact 30 times a second with a fabrication machine? What would that be like? What was the thought experiment? So, if you will, we started with batch processing, we made it to kind of command lines. What would it be like if we actually had direct manipulation? And, okay, so think of this as an art project. We're actually going to show this at the upcoming Kai conference, but this is a little different from the previous ones, and I hope you're going to like it. So here's what happens. 2 people actually, there's 2 players, this is a game. 2 people put a €5 bill in there, that's 5,000, 6,000 won. You can also put in 10,000 won if you like to, or 50,000. And what happens now is, we'll give you an iPhone, you shake it as hard as you can. Do we need sound? Let's see if we have sound. So what happens here is, the harder you shake, the laser actually goes through the 2 money bills, and the harder you shake, the more you push the laser into the money bill of the other person. Okay? So your job is to destroy the money of the other person. And this is us that she's a terrible person to lose against. So we did this on this laser cutter. This one actually is a Chinese fabrication. Alex is actually he's Korean actually. This is Jae-yoon, he's also on my team. And you can see how he didn't quite believe initially that his money would really be destroyed. And anyways, there you go. So we destroyed money in the process. So that was our attempt to just, maybe from an artsy perspective, think about what would it be like if you really directly interacted at full rates with these things. All right. So what I just showed you, we didn't make anything faster, we just interacted at higher rates. So these things on top, what really happened was there was a separate axis. These were indeed kind of faster, but we also just interacted with smaller and smaller components. Like rather than interacting with a complete 3D print, we started to interact with like features of it, or like just these tiny features in the case of the the destructive gains. But at some point in the future, this will all get substantially faster. And you've already seen things like carbon 3D and these things that are actually really fast. So what it's going to be like, and I think in the future we will have things that fabricate 30 times a second. You know, so maybe we can just get like some sort of animation of by quickly making and destroying things. And that obviously is a zoescope, so this is not a fast fabrication tool, it's just an idea. But if we could make these things, we could actually start interacting with physical matter the same way we interact with VR right now. If you think of movies like Iron Man, you know, he has this thing where he reaches into this, you know, his robotic suit somehow in VR. But in the future, these things will happen when you actually reach into physical matter. So we're not the first people to dream this dream. This dream has been dreamt by a lot of people. Here's, for example, we've shaped this place from Hiroshi Ishii's lab. It's kind of a bit like that, right? You have something that changes physical shape quickly. And I'm sure you've all seen this. The dream itself is actually way older than that. People like in modular robotics in the 80s, there was a lot of work at Xerox PARC as well, looked into these things. Today that's called smart matter. People try to make matter arrange itself. And here's an envisionment from a smart matter company. I don't know when you can buy the product, but here's kind of the idea of what it could be like. You could be in a meeting, it could be like a car. You could adjust it in real time and it would be physically tangible. It's not like a computer graphics model. So I don't know. I'm wondering if Fab can get that faster than smart matter. Here's just something we're working on. This is a student Anna here. This is actually a video from, this is not published yet. You're the first people to see this outside the lab. This is something we're working on right now. The video was taken 2 days before I took off on the plane. But you can see as something's happening. So we have a robotic arm, there's a heat gun on it, and the heat gun just heated this thing up, and now Anna can actually pull out the material. So you should be looking here right now. So she wears markers for like a motion capture system, and now she can pull out interactively the material. So we want to continue this, we want to make a whole sculpting system out of this, that you can like say, this cross section we want to pull out here, and then the robot arm is going to go around and heat these things up. And we hope they're going to get like some interactive sculpting system out of this. So don't tell anyone, this is not published yet. There you go. Alright, so this is what we have done on interactivity. I think interactivity will play a big role because it's kind of similar to the questions we had in interactive computing. And I think I'll use the remaining time to tell you more about sustainability and intellectual property. So, if you believe what I said in the beginning, then fabrication will be big, lots of people will be doing these things quickly, iterating a lot, and a lot of trash will be produced. And I think one of the things, would be great if, before we screw things up too badly, if we start thinking about the consequences of what we're doing, just for once, if we started thinking about these things early. So, there's almost no research at this point here, so if anyone is interested in a good research question, here's something, there's lots of stuff to do here. And, since like half of your students, maybe this is something that you want to tackle. It's also a good thing to do. It's good for the planet, good for us. So I got really inspired by this work here. This is work from Ted Selker and folks from Kai 2005. So this is like 10 years old. They made a machine that made dishes on demand. And they also thought about recycling a little bit, but this actually made me think in some direction. Like at some point in the future, maybe we're going to be in this all-trash society where like if you need something, you're just going to make it and then you dispose of it really quickly. And I think this could create massive issues somehow. So people in the community have started to look at these things. In part, the maker movement looked at filament recycling. So if you have like a maker board or something like this and you've 3D printed something, you can actually chop this up again and get filament back out of this. This works like 5 or 6 times. I think that's a step in the right direction. Maybe one detail, some companies are working on multi-material printing. That's actually kind of an issue, the same way that you have composite materials today in milk, in cartons and so on. They're very hard to recycle. Here's just a little bit of work that is also unpublished work together with my student Alex, where we're looking at metamaterials. So these pliers actually perform as if they consist of multiple materials, but it's actually just a single part of material. So let me show you how to pick up the screw here with these pliers. So I don't know if you look at them, do you understand how they work? So there's no joint here really. It's a very interesting type of plier. So it's all about this thing in the middle here. All the cells are stiff, so they're rigid. And then these cells in the middle here allow the system to kind of skew, and that's how you can pick things up. Here's another example, that's like a simple door latch. And all the mechanical functionalities are all just made from a single material. Some of the components are soft, some of the materials perform as if they were hard. but it actually is all the same material. So here's a rotary joint, there's another sliding component up there. Everything is made from the same material, just by rearranging the material in the appropriate way. All right, so here's another idea. Maybe instead of making so much stuff, maybe we can just make less stuff in the beginning. And here's something we can think about called patching. So today, I think whenever something goes wrong, we instantly make a whole new object, and that feels inherently wrong. If something is, maybe you printed something and the 3D print didn't come out that way, it failed somewhere. We throw this away and we start a new print. And so what we did here is we added the milling machine in, and what you can do is you can actually take an object you've already fabricated and put it back into the machine, and it will grind down the things that you're dissatisfied with, and it's going to replace those. So these two things actually have the same body here, and we put it back in and replace certain things. You can think of, in general, like the idea of repairing things, could be very powerful, right? We've repaired lots of things over the years. Maybe we should think of 3D printers not as machines for making stuff, but as machines for repairing things, and that could go a long way and reduce the material consumption quite considerably. So here's the last thing on that line of things I want to show you, called bottle print, actually. It's also not published yet. So here we're thinking about, well, I think you can figure it out. So this is also a 3D printing system, but most of the things that come out are not 3D print, but they're bottles. So here we're going to make a chair. It's a very simple, I think actually very beautiful chair. It consists of an octahedron as the base, and then there's two tetrahedron in the back that actually allow for creating backrest. And so in Germany, this is like recycling of bottles is big, and returning them, deposit bottles is also big. So the only thing that's 3D printed actually is connectors in the middle here, and everything else is made from bottles. Right, I have a video of this in a second. Maybe I should show it. The project was indeed in part sponsored by Coca-Cola. They gave us only 200 bottles, so I don't know. I think they have more. Look at Dora's face. That's the first thing he assembled one. It's like, oh wow, is this really holding up? I don't know, but it's holding up pretty well actually. So we push this further. Here's a simple truss structure, and we actually get reasonable structural stability out of this thing. Alex is a light person, though, I have to say. And here we try to make this bigger by including laser cut parts as well. And so here's like a tent. So here full furniture, here's Ludwig's pet dog, here's the table and two chairs. We get too attached to physical objects in my lab, so we should get a real dog, I guess. So it's just monuments. Oh, I didn't bring the piece of video. There's another piece of video where Rob made one. He made a little boat, and I bet money on the fact that it would sink, but it did work. So they actually took it out to the little pond outside the lab. All right, so here's the challenge I have for you guys. So these, I think, some of the easier things to do. I think the harder issue is actually this one here. If you believe my analogy that 3D fabrication will have some analogies to computing, this is, I think, part of the real problem of computing. It's not necessarily the electricity that you consume, it's the number of machines that are actually thrown away that way. Mobile phones today certainly count in that space as well. I don't know, maybe you get a new phone every year, every 2 years, something like that. So a lot of trash is actually produced that way. And I think what we're going to see in 3D printing and related fields is we're going to have some sort of a Moore's law where things will very quickly produce better ways of doing it. And I think many of these 3D printers will not have used up their own weight in materials. They were just like, you're going to print 10 things with them, and then you're going to buy a new machine. And I think what we're going to have are these big trash heaps of just fabrication machines. So it's an interesting question, how can we address that? People have looked for computing. There was this idea of modularity, that you would actually keep the casing and so on, but I don't recall that ever really working out. So if you have some clever ideas here, let me know how this goes. All right, and the last block I have for you is to look at intellectual property. And So I had this really terrible situation. My aunt, she's 83, she asked me, what is digital? I rambled around for 45 minutes. I certainly did not know what digital was at the time, which was bad because I had to teach an introduction to programming class, and it's a good idea to know what digital is if you do that. But after I thought about this, I went home and did some research, and I think this is what digital is. Digital means, if you're making a digital copy of something, like in the case of a CD, it's not just about the copy you made, it's the fact, as I said at the beginning, that in the process there's this computer copy being made, this kind of digital representation that can actually go somewhere. And making one digital copy is the same as making a million digital copies, because you can stick this onto BitTorrent or any other shared repository, and you can create a lot of different things. And that's actually the reason why we have lots of issues nowadays. So here's the same situation. We're going to see that with 3D models as well, just the same way. You know, as you 3D scan something, in the process you're going to produce like a 3D object. And the question is, well, what's the nature of that object? What's going to happen to that? And I think it's the same thing. Once you have that, it's going to make millions of copies. And designed once, shared a million times. So the need for creating things will be reduced because things that once were made were actually then shared by lots of millions of people. So just as a thought experiment, if you buy like an iPad stand, I guess here that would be a Galaxy Tab stand. Maybe you're paying $10 for it. Maybe you're paying 6,000 won for it. I'm sorry, is that true? No. All right. So the amount of material you need to print it is much smaller. There must be some design in there. And that's an interesting challenge because if you share this model right now, the designer actually doesn't get the $7 for designing this thing because it's now being shared the same way we share music. It's a very interesting analogy. So when I was a kid, I was born in the late 60s. I was a kid in the 70s. And at the time, if you had an album, if you had like a record, that means you owned the music. And if you didn't have the record, then you didn't have the music. And you didn't own it either. Right? There was a very clear analogy between owning the artifact and owning the contents. Now, this changed. People started, they recorded onto tape at the time. And this was illegal in the beginning. You were not allowed to record from the radio when I was a kid. Until the German super evil Intellectual Property Society, they actually ended up getting 20 cents for every blank tape, and then it was legal again. So similar things for MP3s have not worked out, obviously, and so, if you maybe as kids or today, if you're sharing music in massive amounts, you don't enjoy what I had, which is when I was a kid, I was not illegal. You probably all are, right? Because you've shared music with someone at some point. So we're going to have the same issues with sharing material. So what happens in Germany is this: you get like a cease and desist order. It says you downloaded music or you shared this, you shared this movie online, and now we want like thousands of dollars from it. And I think these things will soon go out for people who actually do this with physical matter. There's actually a sharing site at this point already where people can stream contents to the 3D printer, but they can't download it to make sure you can produce it only exactly once and not multiple times. So the last project I want to show is this one. It's our artsy perspective on the question of, of this. So we thought about teleportation, and it turns out there's two definitions of teleportation. Number one is objects travel in their original form through a distorted time-space continuum, like a wormhole. We couldn't implement that. We didn't figure out how to do that. And the second one is what we thought was quite feasible. Objects are disassembled in one location, information about their structure is transmitted, and objects are reassembled from different matter in the remote location. And it's known as beaming, okay, if you're like into that type of sci-fi. So here's our project called Scotty, vaguely named after a TV show from the 60s, I guess. So this is my student Johannes. He's actually created a necklace pendant for his friend Julia, and he puts this into one of the units. He says, send to Julia, and he's going to send this to Julia. And he's not going to send a copy to Julia, he's going to teleport the object, if you will, arguably, right? So what's happening is, inside we have a milling machine, and the milling machine chops off one layer of the object, takes a photograph, chops off another layer, takes another photograph. So it is scanning the object, but it's destroying the object at the same time. So there's always a process of milling and a process of 3D printing. And 90 minutes later, the object is gone, has been evaporated. But there's a digital copy that was encoded to only be printable on the other unit. So obviously Julia is supposed to be like thousands of miles away, and out of her machine comes the necklace pendant that Johannes has designed for her. And it's the only copy around at this point. So take this with a grain of salt. We think of this maybe not quite all that seriously, but this is an interesting question. I mean, today you can buy things from eBay, and you can buy them really quickly, right? One-click shopping, it's like you have it. You pay using PayPal, it's like, you know, and then you wait a week until the object reaches you. I think this could be one way in the future how people actually, you know, also receive the object very quickly because the object, you know, without violating copyright, because the object actually was destroyed in the process. All right, so we just zoom out for you to kind of sum this up. I think in the future we're going to have, you know, if you believe my analogy between personal fabrication and PCs, you know, every 18 months we're going to have new machines, the same way we have every 18 months something in Moore's Law gets better. You know, we're going to have, the same way we have double storage and so on, double processing every 18 months, we're going to have double resolution and higher print speeds and so on. You know, it's the same way that compilers, we already have fab machines that make more fab machines, so they're self-replicating to speed things up. We're going to produce objects of unimaginable complexity. This is a paper model here, but some people are debating how this could go. A friend of mine is working on 3D printing motors right now. I think that's very interesting. There's a lot of work on 3D printing electronics already. So you can envision that you're going to get complete machines out of a 3D printer that's not just mechanical, but actually contains electronics and so on in the device. If you believe my analogy earlier, then I think we're going to transition away from the punch card model we have right now towards a future where we're going to interact with these things in kind of the same way that we're familiar with from our tablets and phones. The process itself hopefully will change as a result. And the main cost, as in all these industries, would shift from hardware initially to software, to training, to maintenance. That's just how these fields go. So in the future, the question is not like how much money does it cost to buy a 3D printer, but the question is how to kind of, make sure people learn how to use it properly, and then ultimately how to maintain them. We're going to sue each other, right? One of you is going to make this wonderful thing, and you're going to sue everyone else in the world for having made that object because you're going to steal that object. And new companies will emerge as well. So there's a right now Apple company is big, but maybe in the future like Thingiverse will be big, or maybe your startup will be big because you are one of the companies who actually initially capitalized on this thing. I think Autodesk has a chance of being big right now in that space. I think the grand challenge is to let everyone solve mechanical problems, so we shouldn't limit ourselves to just having, shape, little things to, beautiful things to look at, like little scans of ourselves, but we should really help people make things that are worth making. Maybe altogether we can solve harder problems, right? So the number of people working in space elevators today is very small, but if a couple of million people pool their ideas, maybe we can get somewhere. All right, and I think these are some problems. If you're a student looking for interesting things to do, I think there's lots of things to do. And I think this is kind of, when you think back of like Dr. Engelbart, he thought of the PC as being a machine that helps us be smart. And I think in the future, places to be smart may actually look more like this, right? So being smart with a computer might actually include physical matter, like near local phone. Okay, so I showed off with a lot of work that I really like, but actually I have to give credit to these people behind me. These are like my students in my lab. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions. So Steve got 3 questions yesterday. If you can give me 4, that would give me an edge on Steve. I would like that. 5 would be too much. I mean, I would go crazy if you asked me 5 questions.
I have a very simple question. We use products under the assumption that the companies that made them made correctly or safely. And the companies are under the regulation of governments, and they hire experts, something like that. But if products are made by ordinary persons, what would happen?
I don't know. I'm probably the worst person to ask. We have all this equipment that is insanely dangerous. And when the students come up to me and say, like, this is dangerous, I say, don't worry, we're going to get new students next year. So if you get hurt, it'll be okay. I think this could go in the same as the IP question, right? I think ultimately a lot of lawyers could come in this space. I think you're right. I think computing equipment is pretty safe to sell, right? It's very difficult to hurt yourself with a computer, at least not in an immediate way. You can hurt yourself by getting a repetitive strain injury or something like this. You know, honestly, I'd never thought about this, but I think they have a point. I think there's a good chance that people at home will actually have reasonably dangerous equipment. At the same time, I think you will see the equipment itself changing. So I mentioned Patrick earlier, who I met with like 4 weeks ago, and they're making an inkjet 3D printer right now. And so maybe you own an inkjet printer at home. It's just for regular ink, and the same technology actually can be used for 3D printing. They say they can make 23 million voxels per second with this stuff, and these things seem reasonably safe. So I kind of would hope that a lot of the, maybe what I said about domain knowledge, maybe the same way that we put in domain knowledge to help you be smart, maybe we also start putting domain knowledge to help you be safe. And I apologize for not having those in the slides, but that's a really good thing to research. I really like this. It'd be good if someone actually, became creative around this, thinking about safety in these systems. Laser cutters, a little bit more dangerous, arguably, and then milling machines probably take the cake. I mean, they indeed are dangerous, I think. Laser cutters probably not so much. 3D printers. All right. Get me 33% closer to Steve. Ask a question.
네, 또 질문이 있으신 분은 손을 들어 표해 주시면 저희가 마이크를 갖다 드리도록 하겠습니다. 예, 저기 마이크 좀 갖다 주십시오. 마이크. 어느 분?
Hello. Thank you for the wonderful lecture, and I have a few questions. To make a real product, I think the biggest problem is the resolution of the materials and things like that, like the joints to make. For example, if I try to make a copy of iPhone, you have to make joints of glass and aluminum, things like that. But I think the resolution of the 3D printing is not really detailed yet. So how would you explain about the future of the resolution of 3D printing stuff?
Yeah, so I thought the same thing, but I think what you're referring to is mostly in the consumer, in the maker space right now. This is a machine from Object that makes 1600 dpi. That's a lot of voxels. 1600 is insane, right? So in printing, we stop caring about resolution when we reach 600 dpi, because that's what you and I can kind of resolve. And 1600 dpi is a lot of, that means like when your fingers go over it, you may not necessarily feel like a structure anymore, just barely actually. So I don't think that 3D printing will be limited quite in this way. I think the bigger problem is that these machines are insanely slow at the same time. So if you go up in the resolution, it takes longer to produce those. So I think some of the evolutions that we're going to see though to increase resolution is closed loop printing. So that means today, I'm actually amazed that these printers work without any back channel. They're just printing, and at the end, in most cases, not always, a 3D object comes out. In the future, we're going to see, and I've seen prototypes of that have a built-in camera. So as they're printing, they're observing the part that's being printed. And by doing that, they can actually say, oh, this is already high enough. I expected to print another layer, but it turns out this material is already high, we're talking microns, right, tiny. It's already high enough, I'm not going to print it, I'm going to skip that layer. And I think ultimately that's going to give us another boost in terms of resolution, closed loop printing. It's also going to mean that more objects will work out. As I said, I'm completely dumbfounded by the fact that today's process of just printing is working. I mean, these machines produce, millions of voxels, and every single voxel has enough reliability that the whole thing kind of typically works out. In the future, I mean, it's a dumb way of doing it, right? In the future, I think, these machines will monitor what they're doing, and this will, I don't know how much of improvement we're going to get out of this. We need to see. So I don't think that. So what I was talking about earlier, like metamaterials, briefly, right? I think they will have a need for much higher resolution, actually. So I think for just consumer objects, grips, handles, whatever, normal machines, I think the resolution we have right now is plenty. If you're trying to make microscopic structure that actually implements material properties, I think we can probably use another factor of 4 or something like this. I was wondering, are you a student? Right? No, I can't see. You're not a student. Because I wanted to get a question from a student over Steve, and you tell Steve afterwards. No, you're not a student. I want a student question.
네, 그 시간 관계상 마지막 질문을 좀 받아야 되는 질문이 많겠지만.
Hi, I'm Azim from Korea Institute of Science and Technology, and first of all, thanks for the nice talk. I have a question regarding the repairs of anything. Like, I think the 3D printing can have a big application in repairs, but the biggest problem is that we cannot fix the 3D print into an existing object like gluing, or if you have to make the thing airtight or something. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the whole question of gluing means that question kind of goes away almost, right? Because the 3D printer is essentially gluing everything, right? So when people say like, oh, sometimes you have these things, they say this would have been impossible to make without a 3D printer. That's not really true, because you obviously can make this by gluing things together, and that's what the 3D printer is too. So I think we're going to see a lot of exciting stuff in materials actually. So let's see here, conductive materials obviously. Well, I don't have super much on here, but I'm not worried about that all that much. I think that in repairing things, we're going to have the right materials and they're going to be fused the right way. I don't necessarily see how the repaired object will be all that distinguishable from the original. Now certainly there's some materials that don't allow for that all that well, like materials you kind of would like to weld, but I wouldn't be surprised if we then ended up using the right process, right, if we ended up welding things together first. You could also think of a welding machine, but maybe I misunderstood you.
Do you think we'll have to have multiple 3D printers?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the big question right now. What happens is the high-end models are able to do much more, and they're very expensive, and they're insanely hard to maintain. I think the rate of error is going up dramatically if you have more possibilities. So, my personal terrible vision of the future goes like this. That in the future people will have not just different machines for doing different things, they will also have different machines because they're all incompatible with each other. So they're going to have, oh yeah, the first 50 3D models we made, they print on this thing, and then we have those and so on. So when I said, I didn't make a topic on this for this talk, but what I said about maintenance is going to be a big thing. And I think in many ways what you're alluding to are maintenance issues, right? When I was working at Microsoft, we had rooms. I mean, they were not maybe this size of a room here, and they were filled with PCs. And whenever the Windows operating system would go out, it has to be tested. I mean, multiple shelves, right? Like 100 machines in there. It would have to be tested in every single machine in that room somehow. And I think we're going to have situations like this in the future, where like before 3D model goes out, it will be tested on all these gazillion machines, all compatible with each other and so on. And yeah, I mean, if you start working on maintenance today, I think you're way ahead of the curve. So the market obviously will hit maintenance as a topic at some point.
Okay, session is short and sorry to interrupt your questioning. Maybe you can ask a question after the session. And also, he will be around until the end of the conference. So
Absolutely.
I think we can catch him. Okay, then thank you all for your attending, and another big round of applause to our speaker today.
네, 키노트 강의는 이것으로 마쳤고 잠시 안내 말씀드리겠습니다. 본 장소에서 식사가 준비가 되는 관계로 다 퇴장을 하셔서 저희가